Hello, James Moffitt here. Please go to parentingadultchildren.org website and sign up for a free membership and leave a review for this episode. If you have any requests for future topics, send me an email at talkpac@proton.me. That's talkpac@proton.me. Please share this podcast with your friends and family. Now for today's guest interview.
Welcome to the podcast ABCs of Parenting Adult Children. Please join us as we discuss parenting adult children and the unique struggles that it comes along with.
Hello and welcome to ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast. My name is James Moffitt and I'll be your host. We have a special guest today, Robert Delena. Is that how you say it?
Yep, you got it. Perfect.
Cool. Robert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. Robert, go ahead and introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
So my name is Robert Delena. I'm from Sudbury, Massachusetts. I grew up in a town called Revere, Massachusetts. Sudbury's a few minutes west of Boston. I live out here with my wife, Mary Beth, and my two children, Ryan, who is 23, and my daughter, Abigail, who is about to turn 22.
All right. So you're up there where that Boston Marathon was at, right?
Yeah, we just had it. It's a good
I'm thinking
event.
of
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the infamous one where they had a
Yeah.
active. Was it a bomb? I guess it was a bomb.
Well,
Was
there
it?
were two bombs, two brothers, terrorist act, set off two separate bombs. A total of 4 people were killed. It
That's
was
crazy.
It was always a great event, special event, and just the worst event to attack because most of the people are running for charity. I mean, you have the elite runners who are running to win the race, but most
Right.
of the event is done in an effort to raise money for different causes, and that's what they chose to attack. So it was really tough on Boston, but the city rallied, and we had them both, one dead and one in jail in about 4 days, and pieced things back together. And the Red Sox won the World Series that year out of nowhere, so it was
There you go.
cathartic year.
So I'm going to read this little paragraph from your profile. It says, Robert Delena's journey highlights the transformative power of finding unconventional paths for children facing unique challenges. The episode could delve into how adventurous parenting and challenging the status quo in medical and educational settings can lead to healing and growth. So you wrote a book, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, book's called Without Restraint.
You have a copy of it?
I do. My son and I wrote it together.
I appreciate you sending me a copy of it too.
Published in 2023. It's been out for a couple of years, and it's been received well. And it's a pretty uplifting story, and especially my son. Like I said, we wrote separately, so you're getting his take on his experience through these really terrible therapeutic schools and medication and isolation and all restraint and all the things that were done to him, and how the power of the outdoors, particularly skiing, really changed the course of his life and my life.
Right. That's awesome. So describe some of the challenges that what's your son's name? Ryan. Describe some of the challenges that Ryan faces.
So really faced, I would say, in the past tense.
Faced, okay.
Kind of the irony. I mean, Ryan was this really complicated little kid who just wouldn't sit still and had a lot of issues, particularly when he went to school. And the schools right away flagged him as being, his behavior as being outside the norm. And they encouraged us to push him into a therapeutic school, which was a small private school, where he would have, more individual attention and all of the things that my wife and I thought were good. What they kind of hid the ball from us a little bit, and really they shouldn't have hidden it we should have seen it coming, was that they were allowed to restrain Ryan when he became dysregulated. Now that to us was described as when a kid's completely out of control or a threat to himself or others, they would put their arms around him. The way it played out, James, was that they were tackling him in the hallway, 5-6 times a day, every time he did something that, led to a timeout that he wouldn't ever sit for. And so he had all these issues and eventually wound up in a 2-week stint in a mental hospital. We had a doctor that was pushing all kinds of meds on him. And, in the middle of all this, while he's this disaster of a kid and we're restraining him at home because we're advised to do that, randomly took him skiing one day at a local hill near our house. And I wasn't even a skier and I was just desperate for things to do with him.
Right.
Because home was tough. He had a sister who was a couple months younger and they would get into it all the time. And I'd take him to the ski hill and I'd just see a different kid that day. And everything changed after that. We started going skiing more often and regularly. And we started touring all around New England, finding places to ski, and then all around the country. And over a 10-year journey that eventually led to touring the world and culminating in a trip to Antarctica, where he and I did a
Oh, wow.
backcountry expedition on Antarctica, which was pretty amazing. And, so I had what I call parallel tracks. I had a kid that was in the school who was this disaster, who wasn't allowed to go to the water fountain without, a chaperone. And here's this kid who's exploring the planet and really guiding me, because he was a much better skier than I was. And he was a better outdoorsman. He researched mountains. He memorized all the trails, and he was really responsible for my safety. And I kept going back to the town and saying, I think you're wrong. And my wife and I eventually came to be on the same page about this, that maybe we were wrong from the start.
Right.
Misunderstood kid who got into this system. And once we were in the system, it was almost like having a criminal record. We couldn't get him out. And it took 10 years to get him back to public school, where he, so it's a long answer to a short question. But today he's this thriving outdoorsman. He's well known on YouTube. If you look up Ryan Delena, he travels the world and he's been to some amazing places. He lives in a van. He's got a girlfriend. He's independent. He works as a rock climbing guide in Acadia National Park, which is in Maine. And he's, in a lot of ways, the most fully formed 24-year-old, that I know. I mean, he really is this, kind of independent spirit, and he's happy and he's passionate about what he does. And a lot of ways, he's easier to parent than my daughter, who is kind of this typical kid who got good grades and thrived in school. But I still look at her and wonder, what she really figured it all out. It's just, she knows exactly what she wants to do when she graduates, and, what does she want to be. And it's kind of ironic. I worry more about her than I worry about him.
So what did the medical establishment label him with?
Great question. So his original diagnosis, and the one that I guess technically still holds, is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. People call it PDD-NOS. And if you think about, say those words out loud to yourself, so it's pervasive, it's developmental, it's a disorder, but we really don't know what it is or why you have it. And it was this catch-all category that schools were using and doctors were encouraged to use, because it allowed you to get services from the town. It made the government pay for everything. I remember my wife and I thinking, and originally we really didn't care what they called it. Back then you were either on the autism, you were either autistic or you weren't. The spectrum hadn't really been developed where every kid could slot somewhere on this autism spectrum.
Right.
You were kind of on it or you weren't. And Ryan was not autistic because he was so verbal, but it was really just his behaviors he was emotional. When he didn't get his way, he was loud, and he would do things. He was a risk taker. He would climb on everything. He'd never stop moving in the house. He probably, in retrospect, this maybe on the ADHD kind of he would be sort of categorized as that. Back then they tried the initial, every day they throw the Ritalin at you, the first appointment. And, that didn't really work for him. So when it sped him up, so we were left with, all right, well, what is he? And then that's how we landed on PDD-NOS, which really tells you nothing. It doesn't hold really today as a label, not something we even think about.
I got you. So what sparked your decision to challenge expert advice on Ryan's care?
That's a great question. So when I would take him skiing, I think a lot of ways skiing was this very freeing place for him, because I couldn't contain him. It was just too vast, and I couldn't catch him because he was better than me. So he had this ability to just explore the mountain on his own. And I was watching this kid make really good decisions. But also in getting to the ski mountain, we had to drive places. We had to fly places. We spent a lot of time together, just one-on-one on chairlifts in hotels. And I just saw this kid as different than what I was seeing at home. So what originally my thought was, okay, I just have to fill his life with things like skiing and he'll be okay. And then I eventually came to realize the real Ryan was the Ryan I was seeing on the ski hill. I needed to then tell everybody back in the rest of the world that he was fine. And so I think it was the experience skiing what really led me to see a different kid than everybody else.
That's interesting. Well, that kind of answered the next question. How did skiing reveal a different side of Ryan's personality? I think you kind of answered that one.
Definitely. Well, one thing I will say is it was the one place where in any aspect of his life, whenever he did anything, he was told he couldn't do it. Ryan, get off the couch. Ryan, get off the, don't climb the door jam. Ryan, don't jump off the deck. Skiing was this place where risk was rewarded as long as it was appropriate. I mean, I didn't want to see him go jumping off cliffs when he wasn't ready, but, it's the kind of place where, if you push the envelope a little and maybe you went in a trail that you weren't supposed to, or you did jump off something that other people, maybe couldn't do, he was lauded for it. People would clap, people would pat him on the head, and I would just see this place where he was allowed to thrive. And so I think that was really what skiing allowed for.
You froze up on me.
Sorry, I was just saying that skiing was really the one place where risk was rewarded. He was allowed to go into the woods or jump off things and maybe push the envelope a little bit in an appropriate way. And he was lauded for that. He wasn't questioned. He wasn't yelled at. He wasn't restrained. If anything, he was complimented for it. So I did see a lot of growth when we were skiing.
Okay. How did adventure play a role in Ryan's emotional development?
I think for him, the power of nature, I wasn't an outdoorsman. We weren't people who camped. I didn't, I wish I had done the Boy Scouts or something with him. It just wasn't something I grew up with. I don't really
Right.
like, to be outside and have bugs and I don't know, but bathrooms, I like hotels, so it was really on me that I wish I had more of that. And I had given him, the chance to, kind of explore the wood, but he just liked it so much that it started with skiing, but eventually it led to hiking and rock climbing. When he got his license when he was 16, he started driving to New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine. There's a series of peaks up here there's the White Mountains and the Green Mountains. There's the 100 highest peaks or something that people will climb over a lifetime. Well, Ryan did it in about a summer and a half. He would just get in the car every day and he was on his own, just figuring out where these places were and climbing 5 or 6 peaks a day. So I think it was a chance for him to reset. He didn't mind the solace of it. He was alone, but he wasn't really alone because there were plants and animals, and there was always the history of the region. And I think for him, it checked a lot of boxes. It gave him a chance, I think, to be who he really was. And he's always been a fact acquirer. He loved knowledge, so he would learn everything about what the risks were, what the whether were there bears, were there not bears, what kind of plants were there. And I think for him, it was a growth experience. For school was so negative all the time. If you talk to Ryan now, you'd think he has a PhD from Harvard and something because he's really, really bright. But he acquired all that knowledge on his own through YouTube,
Right.
through just reading, on his own blogs and those kind of things that existed in nature really interested him the most. So it
Right.
just, again, it was another growth opportunity, and it was a chance for him to not be in a classroom setting where you have to learn what everybody else is learning, whether you want to or not. He's one of those guys that, if he's interested in something, he'll do a 6,000 word blog post on a ski run or a rock climbing run. But in school, if he had to write a paragraph on, Thomas Jefferson, like it was torture to watch because if he
Right.
just wasn't interested in it, he just couldn't do it. And unfortunately, school and, a lot of times us in life and work, we set ourselves up in a long, laundry list of things every day that we really don't want to do, but we have to do. The way his mind works, he won't do those things. He just wants to do the things he's interested in. It's a great way to live. I think we all couldn't live that way because the world would probably break down, but I envy him for it. I wish in a lot of ways
Sure.
that I lived that way.
Did you ever have him his IQ tested?
Well, not an IQ test per se. I mean, when he took the test originally, when they were trying to figure out what was wrong with him, there was an educational component in that, and he would score really highly on, sort of verbal reasoning and quantitative things. It was more like the emotional stuff or spatial or, he had some real deficits. His processing speed on some stuff was a little slower, but he was very linear. He has a photographic memory. So he was one of those kids. His strengths were so strong and his weaknesses were so pronounced. It created this imbalance all the time. I think he's not somebody that kind of lands in the middle on anything. He's either really good at things or it was on the weaker side. But I have seen those things that were viewed as deficits before come up. I think as he's gained more confidence in some of this trauma that was just taken from him, and he's not worried about the teacher kind of locking him in a room. He's slower on some stuff to learn, but he eventually gets there. So he's got an interesting profile, and I think that's what made it difficult when he was little to figure out.
Did Ryan ever transition back into public school?
Yeah, so it took until junior year of high school. So really, I started asking Sudbury to take him back, or my wife did as well, from the first therapeutic school on, which would have been like 4th grade. They would never agree, and instead they would agree to another therapeutic school. So we went to 3 therapeutic schools. They were slightly better each time, but they still had the ability to restrain or isolate you if they wanted to. So as long as that was hanging over his head, he really couldn't thrive. They eventually put him in sort of a transition program around freshman, sophomore year. And then finally, junior year, they agreed to a 45-day evaluation at the public school. I think they thought he was going to last 5 minutes, and he lasted 2 years and got a degree, got his diploma. And he eventually went on to college. He went to we found an outdoor college I didn't prioritize, I didn't really care because I knew he wanted to be a ski guide and a rock climbing guide and stuff he didn't really need a college degree for. But we found this outdoor education program. At the time, it was a place called Johnson State. It eventually became Northern Vermont University. Now it's Vermont State University. It keeps changing names. But there's a program in Vermont with a series of these small colleges, and they have a degree that specializes in the outdoors. And that was a perfect fit for him. It wasn't easy. COVID hit during the middle of it. So you have this outdoor education program, and they're doing it on Zoom, which was terrible and made no sense. And
Right.
for him, it was a disaster. It added an extra year. We let him drop out for a while during that just because it was dumb. But he did graduate in 5 years. Again, the diploma doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, but I am proud that he was able to tough it out and do it. And really, in a lot of subjects that he didn't really have interest in, but he had to meet requirements and get his degree. So he's done, he's finished, and now he's on to his professional career.
That's awesome. I have somebody here that wants to be on the podcast.
Sure. Who's that?
She's bugging me. Roxy.
I got a couple of those.
Roxy, what are you doing? Say hi.
How you doing?
Say hi. You want to go outside, don't you? I can't let you outside right now. Yeah. You gotta wait.
You're wagging. You want to go?
Yeah, she's a mess.
That's all right.
Yeah, luckily she's not barking.
No, that's
anyway.
I have two more yippy barkers, so I'm praying nobody comes to the door.
So the last question is what advice do you have for parents questioning traditional methods?
I think the first thing is your kid better than anybody else, particularly here in Boston, and not to sound arrogant about the region here, but we're surrounded by a lot of top-notch colleges and medical schools. And, when we would walk into some of these doctors' offices, and my wife and I are both lawyers by trade, but, they have, the bunch of degrees behind them, and we just assume they knew more than we did. And it took a few years to figure out that they know their little world so well, but doesn't mean your kid fits. And 5 minutes after you walk out of that office, somebody else walks in, and they're not living it every day like you are. And so your child better than anybody. I don't care what their expertise is. And second, and this applies to, kids with issues, kids without issues. If they have something that they're passionate about, particularly in this world right now where they're spending a lot of time in this sort of alternate reality and virtual reality, and sort of, they're not really developing the skills that I think we were forced to develop, interpersonal skills and relationship skills. If they're not motivated by something, they're left with this thing in their hand all day long that entertains them, but really doesn't, force them into situations where they're going to grow. So some sort of passion. I think you have, you can be passionate about work. You can be passionate about your relationships. You can be passionate about your outside activities, your hobbies. But, my life advice to kids is always, you gotta get one of those three right. If you really, hopefully you get 2 or 3. Most people don't, but if you can get one of those, at least there's a reason every day to get out of bed. So I think for parents, and it's harder when your kids have issues and the world becomes narrower, but even within the most narrow subset, I've seen kids who, they develop some, weird obsession with something and they love it. And as long as you have that, it gives them a reason every day, to get up. So I think that's it. Your kid's better than everybody else. Find something that they're passionate about. And it's going to be a series of fits and starts. I mean, Ryan talks about it in the book. I was an athlete. I played baseball in college. My wife played field hockey and lacrosse. We assumed he was going to be an athlete. We tried every sport under the sun. They always ended in tears. One day we end up on a ski hill and our whole lives change after that. And it wasn't the first thing we tried out of the box. Believe me, we had a lot of failed attempts to get there.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you and your wife stuck with it and started thinking outside of the box and found something that Ryan was passionate about and all of that. So I want to read this listener's takeaway. It says listeners will gain insights into embracing creativity and resilience in parenting, encouraging them to explore unique paths and fostering their children's growth. I like that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Robert, thank you for being on the podcast and for sharing your story and Ryan's story and your family story. And I'm hoping that this will give somebody in our listening audience hope if they're struggling with this sort of thing as well.
My pleasure.
So to the listening audience, I want to say thank you for the privilege of your time. Our podcast is hosted on Captivate FM, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Public Radio. I also upload the video portion of this podcast episode to rumble.com, rumble.com. Be sure to share our podcast with your Second Amendment friends, family, and coworkers. Wrong podcast, James. Be sure to share our podcast with your family and coworkers. Just ignore the Second Amendment part of that. You can contact us at .org. My website is parentingadultchildren.org. If you go to the website, you'll see there's some tabs at the top. One's about, one's contact, one's reviews. If you go to the blog, I put 2 months worth of releases that are coming. Like right now, it's still in April and May. So you can see all the different episodes that are going to come out. I release one every Friday morning at 8 a.m. There's a review tab. You can go to the review and you can review any of the podcast episodes you've listened to. If you're on Apple Podcasts, I think 88% of my listening audience uses iPads and iPhones primarily to listen to Apple Podcasts while they're on the go. If you're listening to one of the podcast episodes on your Apple device, you can actually go to that there's a place right there on the podcast episode where you can review it. So if you would do that, I'd appreciate it. So having said all of that, thank you for tuning in. And Robert, thank you for being here and sharing your story and Ryan's story.
My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. You really do.
Yeah. And so I'm going to say bye-bye. Everybody have a good day.
Take care.
Please tune in next week for another episode of our podcast on parenting adult children.